Hi and welcome back. So let's take a look at the dunder string and dunder repr methods. So let's go ahead and write a class. So let's write our person class and we'll do an init. We'll say self and then we'll have the name, let's say, and the age. And so we'll just store those in instance attributes direct and self.age equals age. Now I'm going to write the representation method. So again, it is a method. It'll be bound to the instance when we call it from the instance. And let's just put in a print statement so that we can see when this function actually gets called. And then here we're just going to return an f string. So here I want to make my representation the way that we would use code to recreate the person object. So it's going to be a string that's essentially going to contain the person class that we're calling. Then we'll put in the name. Now the name needs to be in quotes because we're going to pass it a string like so. This is why I use the double quote for the actual string delimiter, so I can use single quotes inside without having to escape them. And then we also need the age, and age is just going to be the self.age. So here it's going to be interpolating self.name, and here we're going to interpolate self.age. Okay, so that's our person class. So now I can go ahead and create a person object. Let's say Python, and Python is 30 years old. So here's how now when we do various representations of this object instance, right, of this instance P. So if we use Jupyter's representation, so we just do P like this and then hit enter, then you can see that the representation method was called and we get this, right? Which is how we would basically recreate the object. But of course, we can return anything we want in there. Now what happens when we call the print function? So let's call print p, and as you can see, it also called the repr method. We can also use string p, and of course, that also calls the repr method. So as you can see, in all the cases here, our representation method was called. So now let's go ahead and implement the string, the dunder string method. So let me copy paste and let's go down here and let's implement the string method. So for the string, I'm going to return something just a little bit different. First of all, I am going to put in that print statement so we can see, which method now gets called, even though from the return value we should be able to tell. And so for the string representation of the person, I'm just going to return the name. I'm going to say, okay, that's how I want to represent an instance of my person class. So again, we're going to create an instance. So let's say Python and 30. And now let's go through all the different methods that we had for getting the representation of our instance that we did before. So first of all, the built-in Jupyter one. So as you can see, Jupyter calls the repr method. And that kind of makes sense because we're more interested in at this point when we're working interactively in seeing this developer version of the representation. But if we call, let's say, the print function, so we can call print p, you can see in this case that the string method was called. And so we got Python back, not this more complex representation. We can do the same thing, of course, with the string function. And as we would expect, that does indeed call the string method. So that worked the same. So we can also use the repr function that Python has, and that will explicitly call the representation, the dunder repr method. So now question might be, well, what happens if we have, let's say, the string method, but not the representation method in our class? So we'll discuss inheritance later, but every object basically has a repr method because it inherits that from the kind of the base class that we have, that all objects have. And so we'll see what happens when we do that. So let's go ahead for now and let's just implement two empty classes. So they're technically empty from our perspective, but of course they're not. As we know, Python implements a lot of functionality for us. In particular, those classes are callables, so we can instantiate instances of those classes. So let's go ahead and do that. So now we have two instances, and I can call repr of person and I can call repr of point. Now I don't have the repr method defined in those classes, but as you can see, we get this default implementation for repr, which is the name of the class and the module that it's located in, and then the memory address where that object starts. Now if we use the string function, we can call string on person and string on point, you'll see what happens. We get the exact same output. And this was, as I explained in the lecture, when the string method, the dunder string method, doesn't exist, Python falls back to the dunder repr method. Well, that's what happened in this case. Our class doesn't implement the dunder string method, so it falls back to the repr method. But which one? Well, the default one, right? Because obviously we didn't implement one here. So it goes back to its default. And so in fact, this is what happened here. It basically ended up calling the same methods that this function over here called. Okay, so now that we understand that, let's go back to our person class. So let's take this person class. I'll just copy paste it. And all I'm going to do is just remove the representation method, like so. And now let's go ahead and create an instance. So person, Python 30. And now let's look at the representation. Remember, this is going to call the repr method. And as you can see, because we don't have a repr method, it actually goes back to the default repr method. It doesn't use our string method. It actually wants to use a repr because that's specifically what we said. If we had done repr of p, it would do exactly the same thing. It's basically going to go back to the default representation and bring this data back. But of course, if we use print, well, print is looking for the string method, and it does find a string method in our class, so it uses it. And the same thing if we did string, of course. If we do that, the string method is also called. Now, lastly, various formatting functions will also prefer using the string method when available. So let's go back to our person class that implemented both. So I'm going to copy and paste this back down here. And let's redefine our class. And let's create an instance of the person class, Python 30. And now let's use a formatted string. So an interpolated formatted string. So I'm going to use an f string. The person is p. And let's see which representation it uses, the repr or the string. And as you can see, it uses the string. Now, if the string wasn't there, then it would fall back to using the repr method, right? So if I was to take this out, let's say, so let me remove that and do it again, you can see now the repr method was called. Okay, so let's go back to where we were. And now we also have the string formatting that we can use, this style of formatted strings. The person is that, and then we use a dot format. So we use the format method, we pass in the object. And as you can see, it once more looked at the dunder string method to get the string representation in this form. And then the last one that you may have used as well is the person is, and then let's say a %s, and then %p. This is kind of a much older style. It's not used very frequently, but it also calls the string method. So all these different formatting methods will try and call the string, the dunder string method, if it's present. If not, it will fall back to the repr method. All right, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.